All right. Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of The World on Fire. I know it's been a while. I will be back next week, resuming the social movements series that I've been doing, but I wanted to take a brief break this week and cover something else from the perspective of World on Fire. Again, I am Dr. B.R. Cross of Silvertree Consultants. And this is an occasional podcast and web series that looks at dynamics of social change, um, not just in the US, but worldwide. But we're looking at the US today, certainly. Um, so I wanted to cover some of the things that have been going on recently. Obviously, it's been a lot, right? And this is part of the strategy of the Trump administration is to flood the zone with a lot of different things, such that it makes it hard to kind of focus on any one thing. And I wanted to say, I think a lot of people keep looking at history and saying, "Oh, look, this happened in Germany in 1930s," right? And he keeps posting this Martin Niemöller quote: "The first they came for the socialist one." And I want to say it's not going to look the same. It's not going to be the socialists. It's not going to be the trade unionists. It's not going to be the Jews this time. Probably. It may be eventually any of those groups, but it's going to start somewhere else. And in fact, it's already started. And I wanted to highlight what is happening at Columbia University as a place where people who are concerned with current events should be focusing and should be organizing around. So Colombia has been in the mix with Trump world for a while now. After the Hamas attack against Israel in October and Israel's response, there were active student protests at Columbia, led by students that were at Columbia, against the Israeli actions taken against the Palestinians. Um, Colombia, for its part, characterized these as anti Semitic. This is the point where I remind people that being critical of the political regime in Israel, particularly this yet Netanyahu political regime, is not anti Semitism, and that multiple independent human rights organizations have classified what is happening in Gaza and in Palestinian held lands as a genocide. So, feel free to at me with that, but whatever. It's not a the protest that students at Columbia were engaging in was legally permitted protest. However, the university has become a flashpoint for conservative and MAGA anger because of these protests, because of the media coverage with them. And the university has faced accusations of anti Semitism over even allowing the protest to occur. And again, I want to reiterate protest is a constitutionally protected right. And nothing that these students have done at this point seems to have violated the law. So, in response to some of this, the Trump administration a couple of weeks ago stripped Columbia of about 250 million in federal grants, which is a good amount of money. And rather than fight back, this past Saturday, Columbia decided to allow ICE agents, Immigration and Custom Enforcement agents, to enter a student housing and seize a former student who was living there with his wife and who is a green card holder. Take him and transport him across state lines to a facility in Louisiana. This man, Mahmoud Khalil, uh, he's the guy in the black and white photo, not the protester with the awesome green hair. Um, just a couple of quick facts. He is a former Columbia student. He recently graduated. He's still living in was still living in student housing with his pregnant wife, who is a U.S. citizen. Which, for those of you who are like, well, he's not a student, why is he living there? This is sort of the fact of graduate housing. If you are in for a graduate degree, or if you are married to somebody who is also attending, you can live in the housing there. Um, he is a green card holder, which is important because green card holders enjoy nearly all the same protections and benefits that a citizen does when it comes to constitutional protections, including free speech and right to assembly. He was a leader of student protests at Columbia. This is not in dispute. And he was taken by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers Saturday night and transported to a for-profit prison in Louisiana. So he was taken from New York, processed through New Jersey, and then sent down to this Geo Group-owned prison in Louisiana. He has yet to be charged with any crime. So, constitutionally speaking, what we have is somebody who is covered under the Constitution for their ability to free assembly, free speech, free expression. They've also been detained without any real legal cause being given. Just saying somebody is ungrateful or anti-Semitic is not a sufficient reason for arrest. And has been detained for almost a week now in a facility without much in the way of contact or understanding of how or why or what's going on here. This is bad, right? This is the first they came for. This is who they are coming for first. And the silence from a lot of people speaks volumes on this. Because if it's only ever people you don't agree with up until a point being taken, when it's your turn, there's no one left. That's the Niemöller quote, is not be aware when they targeting people you like. It's too late by then. Be aware anytime they take anybody who should be enjoying these rights and who is being deprived of them. So what we see on display here is a concept called state monopoly of violence. This is not your new favorite board game. This is, and I have a quote by the social theorist Max Weber there, says that government is an institution that holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. In the simplest terms, what that means is the state, the government, is allowed to use violence legally, and furthermore can determine who else is allowed to use violence legally and can subcontract that, right? The state is able to go to war. The state has armies. The state has military equipment. You might, as a private citizen, have a firearm, but you are hugely constrained with how and when and why and where you can use that weapon. The state's only restrictions are the restrictions it decides to put on itself. Again, the state can execute you. The state can indefinitely detain you. Usually we want to see the state using these powers mediated through law, right? Hopefully, we're not going to get to a point where we have politicians just gunning people down in the street for funsies. But the slow erosion of this and the sort of expansion of the monopoly of violence is something that we often want to be on the lookout for when it comes to authoritarian regimes. So when we talk about monopoly of violence within the context of sort of social change and social movements and protest, we often frame it as this concept called repressive capacity. And what repressive capacity in short is how easy or hard it is for the state or its designated agents, right? The people it taps, police, military, Secret Service, whatever arms of the government there are that are empowered to use violence, including sort of institutional violence like arrest and detention, how easy or hard it is for them to do that. Or the way I used to put it to my students was how easy it is to beat the ever-living hell out of protesters without it being a problem. And so you often see state agents, usually police, using violence against protesters. And they have to be careful with this because if it's more sympathetic protesters, they're less able to use violence because there's going to be more sort of social opprobrium around that. But if it's unpopular groups, then generally people aren't that sympathetic and are, alarmingly often okay with the state exercising violence against groups they don't like. Now, state actors do have to be careful with this because being overly repressive, repressing too hard, can create opportunities for the social movement, for the social change. I think the classic example that movement scholars often point to is the tendency for Southern police and Southern elites during the civil rights era to use extremely repressive and violent tactics, attack dogs, water hoses, batons, in a way that it was captured by media and sent out to the entire world, which increased sympathy for the civil rights movement for people like Martin Luther King, and reduced sort of sympathy or agreement with the policy of the segregationists. Right. So that is an instance where they overstepped on the repressive capacity and it backfired on them. But it is important to remember that most of the time, this repressive capacity is going to be wielded against groups you don't like. And if you're struggling to think, well, what would that look like? The example I used to give was Westboro Baptist Church. They're not in the news as much anymore, but for a while there, for decades, Westboro was known as a church that would show up and protest outside of the funerals for LGBTQ folks, for soldiers, for just about anybody who they thought was living a sinful lifestyle in opposition to their cult beliefs. And they would show up with these highly incendiary banners and placards, basically trying to create controversy. They're basically, protest shitposting. And when I used to ask students, how would you feel if you were at a funeral and Westboro showed up and started screaming, horrible things about the deceased, and then the police came and they just threw them all in the back of a paddy wagon and drove off without, reading their rights or anything. And unfortunately, at this point, before really getting into the discussion, most students would say, yeah, it's cool. I don't, F those people. I don't like them at all. The problem with that is if you allow for certain groups to be aggressed against, to be repressed, that you don't agree with, but who are exercising their constitutional rights, then you further erode the meaning that those rights have, and you open wider the aperture for state violence against not just those groups, but any groups that the state deems to be in opposition to itself. So one of the other things, and this is going to tie us back to where Columbia comes in, is sometimes the state chooses not to get involved directly, but allows other groups to carry out oppression by proxy, right? They basically subcontract their monopoly of violence. Often we see this as counter movements, movements opposed to the movement that the government wants to repress. Again, going back to civil rights era, this is the role the KKK played in the 1960s. Once it became apparent that Southern sheriffs and Southern elites were going to face a moral opprobrium for their actions, they empowered Klans members to deploy the violence, to deploy the assaults, to basically do the intimidation that they wanted to do, but which they no longer had sort of the span of sympathy to do. We see this often in authoritarian states where any elite connected institution can be tapped and allowed to at least access some of this repressive capacity, monopoly of violence, as long as they're doing so on behalf or in the interests of the state. And this can be businesses, schools, religious organizations, medical providers. These are places that we will likely see doing this. And this is where this concept of anticipatory compliance comes in, right? Anticipatory compliance is quite simply the tendency of organizations to preemptively comply with the desires of an authority figure or institution. This doesn't have to be authoritarian governments. This can be hierarchical institutions. This can be the minimum wage job you worked when you were a teenager, right? This can be Taco Bell. Workers who self-censor or change their behavior to appease a boss. That's anticipatory compliance. We get worried about anticipatory compliance when the government starts wanting people to do this. Because the government, again, Taco Bell cannot take you out back and shoot you in the parking lot. That is not something that the general manager at your local Taco Bell is empowered to do to their employees. The government, on the other hand, can do that. Presumably they are constrained in the way they do that by law. But this is where the Khalil thing gets very alarming, is they have acted in a way that violates U.S. law for this person who is protected, again, by the U.S. law. And they have done so with the aid of a university, in this case, Columbia, which has gone along and empowered the government's use of violence against this person in this case. So why would Columbia do this, right? I think some of you may be asking, aren't universities, hotbeds of leftist blah, blah, blah? Clearly, you've not been on a university recently, but um, a little bit of this goes back to the history of protests. Again, in the 1960s, we had civil rights. We also had strong anti-Vietnam protests, both of which were in large part driven by student activists who were able to use the university, use the community that the university provided as a way of organizing, forming solidarity, and doing a lot of logistical planning for the protest movements, both anti-war and civil rights. These were very successful, but in the 60 plus years since this, universities have figured out how to stop it from happening again. The other thing that has happened alongside this is the elite capture of university administration. So in the 1950s, 1960s, most university administrators were academics. They were professors, faculty who had risen up the ranks, decided to step back from teaching and take on more administrative roles. Often temporarily, they would rotate back into the faculty. There's still elements of this present in faculty governance. But for the most part, starting in like the late 1970s, you saw a move to replace these academic oriented administrators with people who were more business oriented. And as a result, we've now see an entire class of sort of university administration that is more focused on business and revenue generation than on anything else, right? You have seen a shift where universities used to be educational institutions whose output was education. Now they are money-making organizations whose output may be teaching or, at least student fees, but it could also be athletics. It could be marketing. It could be research. It could be any number of things as long as it is bringing in revenues that make the board happy. The second thing that has happened is alumni who tend to be wealthier, older, and more conservative in their beliefs and views have become a major donor class for a lot of universities. And so they will hold large money donations or endowments over the head of administration to encourage certain behavior. Now, this is where I tell you that I have worked as a university administrator before. And I have seen this firsthand where, it was a student who was very well connected, got in trouble, and this person's father, who is an extremely wealthy person, reached out to the university and said, basically, how much to make this go away, right? So you have this sort of quid pro quo with donors where they will fund things, but only that align with their interests. And then the third place you see pressure that can be applied on universities through government grants. I mentioned up top, Columbia lost $250 million in government grants. That is a staggering amount of money for most institutions. And my guess is that part of that discussion was, we're taking this away because you've been allowing these protests to happen. If you don't want us to change this deal and take more away, you need to do something. You need to work with us on this. So from Columbia's perspective, their calculus was probably this: protest movement that is unpopular with the quote unquote public, especially if you are watching Fox News, a need to mollify their wealthy alums, right, who are probably threatening to withhold donations, and a desire to retain what remains of their federal funding. So you're not going to see colleges and universities this time around fighting against this, at least not the administration for the most part. Um, I would love for some presidents and provosts to prove me wrong, please. But my experience with academic presidents and academic provosts is they're going to follow the money, right? If somebody is going to make a donation, if somebody is going to grease the wheels for federal funds, they will let ICE seize as many of their students as they want. So, what do we do then? Right? First of all, show up, even if it's not your fight. I know it's awesome and cool and fun to, prank your local Tesla dealership, but that's not where the danger is right now. Yeah, Musk is an a-hole. He's doing terrible damage. But, attacking his cars, sure, we can do multiple things, but we need to be focused on the things that are really have the potential to undermine and set precedent in the way that people will be treated moving forward for certain activities and behaviors. This is why it's important to focus on the stuff targeting trans folks. This is why it's important to focus on the stuff targeting immigrants. This is why it's important that we talk about and do not let it disappear the abduction of Mahmoud Khalil, because this is them coming for those socialists. And if we don't speak out, it will happen again. Even if we do speak out, it may happen again, but we need to be doing everything we can. Being obstructionist is not a guarantee of success, but not doing anything or doing the things that are not going to move the needle absolutely are not going to get us there either. So this one was a little bit more of a bummer. Again, I promise next week I will get back to sort of the more basic social movement-y stuff. If you do have any questions, comments, or feedback, I'm sure I'm going to get screamed at by some people who are like anti-Semite. You can send all that hate mail to brcross at silvertreeconsultancy.net. This is also where I'm going to finally remember to say like and subscribe. And as a reminder, I am the owner and founder of Silvertree Consulting. We offer a variety of services, including strategic consulting for social movement and activist organizations. I think somebody in a comment from one of my videos a few weeks ago called me a business consultant. Don't hire me if you're looking to improve your financial bottom line. I don't do that. I help with social change strategy. So if you're interested in that, if you're part of a group, a nonprofit, or you're just looking to kind of figure out how to better organize or develop your media strategy, I am more than willing to work with you on that. This has been The World on Fire. I am Dr. B.R. Cross, and I would say in closing, be safe out there, but be the trouble you want to see in the world. Thank you.